let's understand what the gist of the passage is. He works out the entire passage. You see, on the example of a dozen or half a dozen men you see who are shipwrecked and they are on an uninhabited island, right? Uh, and they have to now look after themselves. Okay, now he has come up with an example where people, perhaps unknown to one another, you see, they have gathered on an isolated island, and now they have to look after themselves. And how would they do it? Now, the thing is, he raises certain important points. And the first point is, if you want to survive, if you want to get ahead there, each one has to work according to his or her own capacity, right? There may be educated people in the shipwrecked island, who have been shipwrecked in the shipwrecked, what you call crew, people. There may be some who may be educated, there may be people who are not educated, there may be people who know a particular task very well, there may be people who can perform one thing well, and they can't do some other thing which others can do. So what he's talking about is that when we are talking about community in general, you carry out your work with cooperation, coordination, and transparency, right? These are the three things you see that one has to follow if he wants to get along, whether it is what you call in general when you're talking about communities, or in general when you're talking about tasks in a company or in a what you call organization. You have to carry out your work. Yes, you have got to carry out your work, and you should carry out the work, you see, not suspecting one another, but trusting one another, right? No secrecy, no separateness, no isolation. You share your problems, you share your doubts, so that others aren't suspicious of you, so that you can carry on with your work. And how do they carry on with their work? Well, first of all, you decide what work you see suits which person. Number one. Number two, don't have any secrets from your colleagues, from the people with whom you're sharing. You see your work. Number three, don't betray. Don't have any unfair practices. Right? Work honestly. And number four, you've got to remember, whatever work you do, you're going to face difficulties there. There'll be hardships. There'll be difficulties there. So you should be ready to face all of that. And the last thing is, there has to be transparency. You should be transparent, right? You should be ready to receive help, give help, share your experience, share your problems. That's the thing, you see. So this passage is about, you see, in a word, to my mind, it's a passage about, you see, communities in general, and people should work with perfect coordination, cooperation, and transparency. So that is the gist, that is the summary of the passage. Now, let us come to the questions. So the first question, he says, when a dozen men are cast away on an imaginary island, the best educated would look for metals and rocks because the answer is number four. And why is it number four? Because look at the passage in the second line. He says that in the first line, he talks about the shipwrecked people. In the second line, he says, one, of course, according to his capacity. That is, you decide, well, who is suited to do which work. Now, the passage doesn't say that the educated would look for metals and rocks because they want to make weapons, or the island has unexploited resources, or he may find it beneath him to dig or cut, make shoes. No, that's not the point. You see, the educated people, you see, it's suited to them. So the answer is number four. And remember, this passage has a general tone. It's not about making weapons or anything of that kind. It has a tone of generality, pointing out that in a society that we live, we require cooperation and coordination. And some of you have talked about such an island probably as unexploited sources. Yes, exactly. You see, now when you say that it has unexploited sources, now the problem is how to exploit them, how to make use of those sources. And in order to make use of these sources, you've got to see, well, which work suits which person according to his abilities and education. Now we can come to the next question. He says here that any appearance of secrecy or separateness would instantly justly be looked upon with suspicion. From this statement, we may infer that. Look at the ninth sentence from the top. So that any appearance of secrecy or separateness in the actions of any of them would instantly and justly be looked upon with suspicion by the rest as the sign of some selfish or foolish proceeding on the part of the individual, right? And then he gives you examples. What can be inferred? What can we draw from this statement when he says that if someone is secretive or someone tries to be separate or isolated in his work, they are looked upon with suspicion? What can we conclude from that? We can infer that it is natural to be suspicious of secrecy. That is the inference. That is what you draw from the statement, that the moment when you're working together in a group and the moment someone decides to isolate himself or herself, or the moment someone decides to appear secretive, then it's natural human tendency to be suspicious of them. So the correct answer is number 3. Let's go on to the next question. He says the instance of the shoemaker who refuses to show his source and asks for more corn and potatoes is an example of, try to understand the point that this question is in what you call in tune with the previous question. He has already talked about, and if you look into the passage, he has talked about the secrecy and separateness, and then he comes with an example about the scientist and the shoemaker, right? And when he comes up with the example and he then talks about, you see, that the shoemaker starts demanding more corn and more potatoes in exchange for the sandal, then what would you, how would you call this example? How would you describe this example? This would be, you see, an example of unfair practice. Because look at the statement he makes here, and that he meant to ask from them more corn and potatoes in exchange for his sandals than the trouble of making them deserve. You see, that the remuneration, the trouble of making them deserve, that is, then that it's a system of unfair practice. You see, try to read the question in context. When you say the answer is the barter system or intent to make trouble, you have read the question in isolation. Read the question in context. You see, they get suspicious of him. He's not ready to expose his resources. He's not ready to share his resources. And then he makes a demand upon them. Then that would be unfair practice, right? And the next question, according to the author, whatever one's work might be. Look at the line from the bottom, starting from the bottom of the passage, 4th line. He says here, and this all the more because whatever the work might be, certainly there would be difficulties about it. So your answer should be number 1, which says hardships are going to be a part of it. What he says here is, whatever work you have, you will face difficulties there. Now, this is a general statement. One cannot keep complaining. One should express others to assure of help and advance our labors. One must offer help to others in order to receive help. These statements, you see, they are of a general kind. And you might even find the last statement, you see, the last number 4, you can find it in the last part of the passage. But that cannot be the answer. You have to look into the context, and he's very specific about it. He says, whatever work you do, you are certain to face difficulties there. So number 1 is the correct answer. We can move on to the next question. The author's belief is that for progress to happen, the answer to this is, the author's belief is that for progress to happen, that people should have multiple talents. We has already talked about that, that each man does work according to his what he call talent. So for that progress to happen, you have people with talents, you have cooperation among team members, and one must deal with all those who are secretive. These are the points that have been raised in the passage. But with people with multiple talents, and if they decide to cooperate, and if they decide not to be secretive, then all this put together, what does it amount to? It amounts to transparency among all concerned. Is, you see, that is what it amounts to. You see, all the three things. Well, you have multiple talents. One man says, well, I can cut wood. The other says, I can work on metal. The third says, I can work on shoes. That they cooperate, and then you see, they decide, you see, they'll have no secrets. All this boils down to one thing, and that requirement for progress to happen is you must have transparency among all concerned. You see, there should be transparency, and they have talked about it in the entire passage, and particularly in the concluding lines of the passage. You see, you can see he's talking about transparency by having no secrets, by frankly bestowing and frankly receiving, right? Option number 4 is the correct. Now we come to the next one. He says the writer makes a hypothesis. Now he's not making a theory. A theory would be different. A hypothesis is only at the threshold of proving something, right? He's just putting out a supposition to you, which can be related to what? Well, if you look at the answers here, options here, he says the hypothesis can be related. You have to relate this hypothesis. Okay, because what has he come up with? He has come up with an imaginary island rich with resources. So that cannot be the answer. That is the hypothesis that he is putting forward. Well, imagine an imaginary island with resources, or he's talking about an ideal world of talented people that is related to that imaginary island, right? Or that is a hypothesis, or a primitive and unsophisticated world that is again related to what you call the island, where you see everything is primitive. You've got to make shoes, you've got to cut bark, you've got to what you call work with metal. So this hypothesis that he is making of people being shipwrecked and isolated on island, the hypothesis can be related to communities in general. How people should work in communities, how they should, you see, maintain transparency, how they should, what you call, be not suspicious of one another, and how they should not behave in a manner, you see, which invites suspicion. Let us look at the passage briefly, right? What is the passage about? Passage is trying to expose the falsity of gender differences. That is, what do you mean? I put it. Let us put it in the simplest terms. Sometimes you see, in the society in which we live, we say the male is more intelligent, the female is less intelligent, men are more intelligent, women are less intelligent, men can work in the science stream or maths or other things, women can go only for easier subjects. You see, these kinds of gender differences, you see, the writer tries to expose the falsity of gender differences. He wants to point out, well, these things are not true. It has been what you call stereotyped, and that is why he says, in this gendered world. You see, he says the world is gendered because we have divided that into what you call men and women. And then one's gender, you see, we tend to argue that, well, it is one's gender that decides, you see, his skills and preferences. Girls can only do this and boys can do much more, right? A girl can play with only can play only with a Barbie doll, whereas a boy, you see, he can work with a Lego set. A Lego set is supposed to be what you call the building sets. You see, building bricks and other things, you see, that's a Lego set, a little more complicated. Now, by this argument, the writer wants to tell us, well, are we coming to the point that the brains are different? That the women, you see, have different brains and men have different brains. And the next sentence he says, this myth has been exploded. What do you mean by exploded? That is, it has been exposed. The falsity, the truth of the entire thing has been exposed by, you see, a British professor. And she has pointed out that things have been misinterpreted. The wrong questions have been put forward. And that is why we get wrong answers. We should not have what you call this gendered view that men can do such and such task and women cannot do that. That is incorrect. That is wrong. In fact, you see, it's only a question of what you call your effort, your hard work, that decides, you see, the skills that you possess. It's not the gender. You come up with saying that men can drive better than women can do. Now, what kind of argument is that? Or you say men can do mathematics much better than women can do. What kind of argument is that? It is a gendered argument. It's a biased argument, right? So look at the sentence. It says, her conclusive findings establish that no brain differences can be found that are solely gender related. Yes, you cannot possibly categorize the brain into what you call the male and the female. You can't do that. So that is the point he's trying to make, and he says that we should dump these myths and look at the whole thing in a what you call fresh manner. You see, because all this time the debate about the men and women, what you call skills and brains, they have been based on inaccuracies. See, I gave you an example, and he's pointing out the same thing as a hook to justify saying there is no point in girls doing science because they do not have a science brain, or compelling boys to opt for science because their brains are shaped for that subject. Now, he says that is very foolish to say that. We can't come up with such conclusions. So if you go by that argument, then what will happen? He says that then you will start criticizing boys for being emotional, because you will say, well, being emotional is only a feminine trait, a feminine character. It's not the what you call the domain of male. How can you say that? So, and then finally, you come up with the dangerous argument that only men can lead, boys can lead, girls cannot. What have you done? He wants to tell us that subordinated woman in status. We have subordinated woman in status. We have given her a lower status, and we want to make her what you call submissive and establish the male superiority or the male chauvinism. You see, that's what we are trying to do, and we have got to get rid of that and treat everyone as equal. And we don't have to pursue what you call gendered differences. Now we'll come to the questions. The research of a British professor of cognitive neuroimaging has succeeded in establishing. The answer is number 4. The potential of a human brain is not directly linked to gender. That is what she has been arguing. Number 1 is incorrect. Number 2 is incorrect. And number 3 is also incorrect. Why do you call that incorrect? Because look at the question carefully. Has succeeded in establishing. She has established something. The other 3 things, right? You cannot, they don't fall within the category of establishing something. Science needs to challenge the status quo. She hasn't established that. Society must break away from attempts at stereotyping gender. She doesn't establish. She has established one thing, that is the potential of a human brain is not directly linked to gender. We take up the next question. Look at, you may be a little what you call misled by the options given here, because all of them appear to be a little similar. Gender differences can be detected right from childhood. No, that's not the point. Look at the statement that is given in paragraph number 1, the 3rd line. He says here, but we can be today see a swing away from these stereotypes, or have they established a stranglehold on our perception? A stranglehold is a limitation, what you call a limitation, a control on our perceptions. And what is that control? The thing is, in this gendered world, that is the society, you see, has decided to what you call treat everything according to gender. We continue to live with notions that one's gender determines one's skills and preferences, right? So the thing is, that means the society continues to be fixated on gender stereotypes. That is the point. Then you might say, sir, why can't it be 3? Why can't we say one's gender is bound to define one's ability? Exactly. Exactly. That is the point which leads the society to be fixated on gender stereotypes. You see, number 3 is an example, and number 1 is the statement you see that he talks about the gendered, you see, calling the word gender, right? So, number 2 is the correct answer. We move on to the next question. So, what is the danger? If you take a binary view of the human brain by saying, well, this is the male and this is the female brain, or you say this is the man's brain, woman. If you do that, then what is the danger? The danger is you promote the notion of feminine and masculine traits. Then you have a gendered world, you see. The danger is, well, you say, well, this is the masculine characteristic and this is the feminine. This has to be done by men, this has to be done by women, right? So that is the answer. Determine as well as limit academic choices, lead to the distortion, can be used to engage male dominance and superiority. You see, these 3 points, they are nestled, they are couched in number 1. Now let us move to what you call the next question. The writer of this passage wants to emphasize the need. It's obvious when you read the passage, it should be, the answer should be number 1, to use insights provided by scientific research for a better understanding of human abilities. You see, well, the scientific data, whatever you see, you have new insights, you see, provided by scientific research and this thing, and you must utilize that not to create stereotypes, right? Or not to create what you call binary views or something of that kind, but what you call in order to better understand the human abilities. That is what the writer wants to point out. So number 1 should be the answers. The others cannot be correct. You can see for yourself, because continuously debate issues of gender. No, he doesn't want us to debate. You question the findings into functioning of the human. That's not the aim of the passage. The functioning of the human brain, and accept gender differences as essential. No, he is actually going against it. You see, he doesn't want to accept gender differences. You see, we come to the next one, and that is a question on vocabulary. The synonym for stranglehold is what you call overwhelming control. This is for what you call overwhelming control. If you have a stranglehold on something, that is, you limit it, you control it, right? Asphyxiation is what you call strangling. You see someone suffocating, containment and prohibiting, and they are simple words. So that's about all. And the next one is the antonym for unbounded. Uh, Unbounded is what? Without limits, right? Unbounded means unlimited. So the antonym for that would be restricted. Restricted would be the antonym. The other words are simple. Imprisoned means jailed or imprisoned. Aggressive means belligerent, right? Pugnacious, ready to fight, that is belligerent, and fearful is being scared. Now look at the first sentence. Although he's recovering from his illness, he has to follow certain diet restrictions. He cannot eat junk food. Please do not pity him and give him some snack. Number 1 is the correct answer. Why can't it be number 2? Cut him some slack. Now, what does that mean? That's an idiom, and that means to give additional freedom, to give additional liberty. You see, if you cut someone some slack, that is, you give him some freedom, to give additional freedom. Okay. Be slack with his eating, that simply means literally what it says, that is, be slow in eating. So you can't have please do not pity him and be slow with his eating. It doesn't mean anything, right? Cut down the snacks. A better option would be give him some snack instead of saying cut down the snacks, right? Next question is, the problems may be difficult, but all you have to do is to hang in there. When you say hang in there, that is the idiomatic way of saying you have to keep patience and perseverance, right? You just have got to keep patience and perseverance. You can't say hanging up there. That doesn't mean anything. It's like telling someone to go and hang in up there. It doesn't mean. Or if you say hang on there, hang on, it's a phrasal verb. It means to stop or to wait. You say just hang on there for some time. I'll be there in a few minutes. Okay. And hang on to that. That is, you cling to something, you grip something, you say hang on to that, what you call a particular piece of rope, or sometimes even literally you can say, well, you keep on hanging on to that wire till the rescue team reaches there. The next one, the standards set by the examination board are so high that it would be difficult for poorly prepared students. Now, what does the context say here? You see, the standards are very high, and it will be difficult for the poorly prepared students to pass the examination. You see, that is what he wants to tell us. That is the contextual meaning. What you call phrase would suit this blank here. To say to pass most errors doesn't mean anything. How can you say I will pass the errors, right? And to get past most errors, that doesn't make sense. Now you have a choice between past muster and past muster. Past muster is wrong. You don't have a phrase like that kind. The correct option is past muster. Past muster means to qualify to be acceptable. I said why qualify and to acceptable, because sometimes you use it, well, this decision won't pass muster with me. That is, it won't be acceptable to me, right? Yeah, you can use it that way also in that. Now look at the next one. After all the alliances and arithmetic, the party is likely to a majority in the assembly election. Now, from the context, you can figure out that the party has worked out, you see, alliances. It has made certain calculations that who will be in the party, who are the people who are going to join the party, who are the people who are going to leave the party. The alliances in arithmetic, you see, refers to the party's calculations, you see. So in that sense, the party is likely to what? Gain a majority. You see, that is the point. So the party is likely to, you must say, scrape together a majority. To scrape together means to bring together, to succeed in collecting together, right? That is scrape together. Tape together and shape together, they don't mean much, right? I mean, you can use them in this literal sense, like let us sit down and shape together, you see, our future. That could be used in a more literal sense, you see. Scrape through is what you call just get through, you see, a task or an examination. You say it was with great difficulty I scraped through that examination, right? That is, I was barely in a position to succeed. So the correct answer would be number 2. The next one, I'll have to, because I don't know Sheila's parents, and how Sheila's parents are going to react to this offer. Now, you use the word face the music when you are going to face something very unpleasant. But then, by just reading the sentence, we can't say that, well, he is going to have an unpleasant experience, because we don't know what he is going there for. He or she is going there for. He's going to make an offer. Uh, Count on my fingers, that doesn't make any sense. If you can count on your fingers, that means something which is very, what do you call, scarce, something which is lacking, something which has a dearth. You say, I can, you can barely count them on your fingers, you see. Break the ice is to introduce, or to be what you call, sometimes you use it formally or informally to say that you start a conversation, you use the word, let's break the ice. You see, there's a party going on, there are strangers, you say, let's break the ice. So it should be played by ear. What do you mean by played by ear? Played by ear means that you're not ready with a plan. you react depending on the circumstances, right? You're not ready with a plan. The other word could be improvise. IMPROVISE. If you had been more alert, this golden opportunity would not have. The correct phrase is slipped through your fingers, right? A better way is, I mean, that is the best way of saying slip through your fingers. You don't say now escaped your fingers or slipped off or escaped away. They are not good English. The correct one is slip through your fingers. The place where her father disappeared and the reason why he did are unknown to her. Now, the problem is you have four options here. You see, in English, constructions like when you use the word reason, you don't require the word why. Why implies a reason. Don't say the reason why I am late today, the reason why he didn't come to college was. That is incorrect because the word reason implies the meaning of why, the meaning of because. So we don't use why or because when you're using the word reason. So now look at the options in C, which could be the correct one. Number one repeats the original. Number two is the correct option. Where a father disappeared and the reason he did are unknown to her. The place her father disappeared and the reason he did. Now you can't say the place her father disappeared. There's a problem in the syntax and the grammar too. When you say the place her father disappeared, you should either say the place her father disappeared into, that is where did he disappear, into some place, you see. So you can't have that. That's the incorrect construction. The last one, where a father disappeared and the reason why he did, uh, that is again incorrect. The next one, which team has the best record, yours or theirs? Now look at the sentence carefully. There are two groups, two units involved. Number one is yours and number two is theirs. And when you have what you call a comparison, you can't use best. You're going to use the comparative degree. You say which team has the better record, yours or theirs. So number one is incorrect. Number two is also incorrect. Number three, you don't have to say which one team has the better record. You say which team has the better. You can use one, but that construction would be different. You say which one of the following teams has a better record out of the two. After sensing a problem with the factory workers, the personnel officer demanded to know who the union leaders had contacted to conduct the petition drive. If you look at the sentence and read it, he says who the union leaders had contacted. Now, going by the grammar in English, right, we generally use who for the subject and whom for the object, right? Uh, that is the thing, you see. So, demanded to know whom the union leaders had contacted. Number one is the correct option. So, two and four are incorrect. And whom the union leaders have contacted. Why? Because there is a needless change of tense. You see, the change in tense is not justified. The next one, his wrongdoing was completely exposed. Sorry, but not once he apologized for his actions. We don't have to go into the entire grammar, but remember that whenever you have a construction like not once, it should be followed by the verb first. The verb should come first. Whenever, whether not once comes at the beginning of the sentence or middle of the sentence, right? The verb should immediately follow not once. You say, not once did he invite me to the party. Not once did he say sorry to me. Not once is he ready to accept his mistakes. So the point is, whenever you have a construction like not once, it should be followed by the verb, right? The correct answer would be number 1. Not once did he apologize. Number 2 is incorrect, but never he made an apology. That is an inverted, that is wrong English. Not once did he give apology. That is wrong. He should have said not once did he offer an apology or give an apology. A better way is saying not once did he apologize. Not once he made an apology. That is wrong, because I told you not once should be followed by what you call the verb. The next one, the municipal council can no longer wash its hands of its responsibilities. Well, most of the time we tend to be carried away by the use of the word, misled by the use of the word OFF. It should be a single OF. Okay, remember that we say, well, during the vacations, I disposed of all the unwanted thing, and we tend to use after dispose, we tend to use OFF off. That is wrong. You said dispose of. I am going to dispose of all the files. OF off, right? So the mistake is you have to look at the phrase. It is wash off, wash one's hands off. OF off. So the correct option here would be number 4, because number 2 again has OFF. The phrase is wash its hands, wash their its hands off its. It can't be wash its hands from, right? That's an incorrect idiom. It's wrong. And again, wash their hand. The municipal council is singular here. Okay. And if it should be, if they wanted to treat this as plural, then they should have said, wash their hands off their responsibilities. The letter states that one can avail the service offered by the company till June 2019. In this sentence, the letter states that one can avail the service offered by the company till. Now, they say that this is acceptable. This is Indian English. You see, the answer here is number 3. So you say avail of the service offered by the company till June 2019. You can say why does he say avail of the service? You see, in Indian English, sometimes what we do is you use the word avail yourselves of the benefits. He availed himself of the benefits. Or you say the letter states that one can avail oneself of the service, right? So what I wanted just to point out is, if number 3 in the 3 option, you see, you suppose they had given it, instead of avail of the service, avail oneself of the service offered by, even that would have been correct. That would have been correct, right? I just wanted to bring to your notice, because in an examination, they might try this kind of, you see, exercise to test the knowledge of the students, right? There is something known as Indian English also, and that Indian English is perfectly acceptable you see, all through the world. So the correct answer is number 3. Number 1, you can't have avail the service on, offer from. You can't do that. Number 4 has the same mistake, offered from. Avail of the service offered from. That's wrong. And avail the service on offer. Why on offer? That is a needless change, inserting a preposition there. Let's come to the exercise now. You see, I just talked about the context, the meaning of the passage. You say, he says, infrastructure in the form of paved surfaces disrupts water absorption and water retention. Okay, so that means infrastructure is one of the causes behind disastrous levels of flooding, because he says, and why? Because in the form of paved surfaces, and you see, it doesn't allow water to be absorbed, and it lowers water retention. Water cannot be retained, it starts flowing freely, and this leads to what you call dangerous levels of flooding, which reduces the biodiversity and what you call impoverish the people of the region. Okay, land should be used mindfully to prevent water logging during heavy rains. Now the thing is, suppose we look at the options here. I mean, if he is talking about infrastructure, which disrupts, you see, interferes with water absorption and which reduces water retention, it doesn't allow water to be retained. If he talks about that, and suppose let us look at all these options one by one in the blank. If you take up number 4, water retention is less important to prevent flooding. Does he say that? I mean, look at the sentence at the beginning. He says lowers water retention, and when the water retention is lowered, then this leads to what you call dangerous levels of flooding. So I mean, it cannot be less important. It is important. It is important. So number 4 cannot fit into it. Number 3 says infrastructure can actually cause a lot of trouble during flooding. I mean, infrastructure can actually cause a lot of trouble. I mean, it is the cause of flooding. That is what he's talking about. I mean, infrastructure, it doesn't cause trouble during flooding. In fact, you see, it leads to dangerous levels of flooding, you see, because of paved surfaces, which interferes with water retention and absorption. So that cannot be the answer. Flooding can happen after heavy or low rainfall. That is a very general statement. Number 1, he says climate change is not only the cause for flooding. That is the correct option, because the other cause is what? Infrastructure in the form of paved surfaces. So the correct option is number 1. Okay, let's look at the next one. Few look forward to old age and all that it brings in its wake. So old age, you see, brings with it, number 1, deteriorating health. That is poor health. Your health starts deteriorating. Loss of vigor, loss of strength. Okay. Restrictive mobility. An old person is not able to walk around. I mean, his movements are restricted. Increasing dependence on others. He starts, you see, as you age on, you require, you see, help from others to move on, to do your work. Not to mention a sense of foreboding and anxiety. You see, that is important. I mean, these are physical conditions: loss of strength, mobility, dependence on others. But then there's something known as, you see, a continuous fear of something that might happen, and anxiety, you see, in the mind all the time, a foreboding and anxiety all the time, you see, scared that something bad is going to happen. He says the such a thing, you see, generally happens with people who have aged. Yet one has to learn to cope with the onset of old age. Yes, one has to learn that. I mean, one has to face old age. Number 1, he says, firstly, it is imperative to prepare to accept old age in spite of the restrictions or limitations it imposes on one's mobility. You see, he's talking about the first point. You've just got to accept, you see, all the limitations of your system, of your constitution, of your body. You've just got to accept those restrictions and limitations that old age imposes upon all of us, unable to do our own work. Equally important is the need to adopt a positive attitude towards life. Now, what is he doing? You see, he has accepted the first part of the argument by saying, well, you have got to accept those restrictions. But then again, he controverts the second points about foreboding and anxiety by saying that instead of foreboding and anxiety, you must adopt a positive attitude towards life. And how do you do that? Let's look after the blank, and then we'll come to the blank. Above all, peace of mind is the efficacious balm that brings equanimity to one's life. That is, you have to retain your peace of mind. And that peace of mind acts as a medicine, as a painkiller. You see, a balm is supposed to be a painkiller, gives you, it's soothing, that brings equanimity to one's life, peace, balance to one's life. We must resign ourselves to growing old, and the process let us try to make life as fulfilling and meaningful as possible. Okay, now what has he talked about? The blank is in the middle. What precedes the blank is a positive attitude towards life. What follows the blank is peace of mind, keeping your cool, keeping your balance. Now, the blank should have an option which you see is connected to both these statements, which is in the context of both these statements. Okay, so let us examine one by one. Suppose we come to number one. The role of humor and fun are indispensable, as these are the spice of life and guaranteed to bring cheer and bonhomie, besides keeping one's mind off life's grim realities. Now, look, be very cautious. What is here said? The positive attitude to life and peace of mind, and what you call the peace of mind serves as a balm, you see, to bring balance and happiness in your life. If that is the case, then he says humor and fun, their roles are very necessary, because they will bring you happiness, they will bring you bonhomie, and they will also, you see, remove your mind from the grim realities of life. And what are the grim realities he has talked about? The deteriorating health, the loss of vigor, the restricted mobility, the increasing dependence, and foreboding and anxiety. You see, those are the grim realities of life, and many more, right? So, to my mind, number one should come into the blank. Now, you say, well, why can't it be two, three, or four? Just let's examine it for in a minute. Owing to advances in medical science, we can now expect to live well beyond 90 years. He is not talking about living beyond 90 years, or you see, the advances in medical science. He's not talking about those things. The two statements before and after, they have to do with what you call making life peaceful. Number three, physical debility and stiffening body joints, creaking in protest may make mobility difficult, something one should learn to take in one stride stoically. Why stoically? I mean, stoicism is being neutral, indifferent to pain and pleasure. But then, just in the preceding line, he's talking about a positive attitude to life. And in the following line, he talks about what is called gaining peace of mind. So, putting this, you see, in between the two statements, talking about the physical debility and all these things, which I had already talked about at the beginning. So, this cannot be the correct answer. Turning nostalgic and recalling those good old days when they were young and life was radically different from what it is today help one accept old age. Now, that cannot be an appropriate, you see, option. Why? Because when you talk about the peace of mind and positive attitude towards life, do you mean to say that turning nostalgic will only fetch experience that are full of happiness? Turning nostalgic, you see, can also bring those experiences which have been unpleasant in your life. So it's not necessary that you see that it would bring about a balance or equanimity. So number one is the correct option. Okay, now let us take up the next one, and that is about the Arab Spring is widely believed to have stemmed from dissatisfaction with the rule of local governments, though some have speculated that wide gaps in income levels may have had a hand as well. Issues such as political corruption, human rights violations, unemployment, and educated but dissatisfied youth may have been responsible as well. Now, what is he talking about? In this paragraph, he's talking about the Arab Spring, and he's talking about the causes, you see, behind the Arab Spring. And he points out the causes are, you see, the dissatisfaction, the rule of the local governments, wide gaps in the income levels, and then political corruption, human right violations, unemployment, the educated unemployment, they may have been the cause. Now, if that is the thing, then the blank should contain something that advances this argument, the reason behind this rising, this Arab Spring. I think, to my mind, the blank should contain a statement which talks about, you see, some other reason, some other cause. Let us see. You say, thus youth unrest was the main reason for the Arab Spring. He hasn't said anything about the youth unrest. He's just pointed out so many reasons. So how can you conclude that youth unrest was the main reason? Has he talked about only about youth unrest that you conclude that so quickly? Okay. Some also cite that 2009-10 Iranian election protest as one of the reasons behind the Arab Spring. Yes, he hasn't talked about this, and this is the correct option. One of the reasons, besides all that have been given in the paragraph, is the Iranian election protest. The Arab Spring was due to the wide gap between the haves and have-nots. That's a conclusion. We are not looking for a conclusion, and he hasn't talked about the haves and have-nots there. To sum up, the Arab Spring was a series of anti-government protests uprising in armed rebellions across the Arab world. Now, what do you call that is a summing up, right? And why can't we sum up? Why can't you say that? The point is, you have to look at the tone of the passage. You see, what he says here, all these things, dissatisfaction and what you call the wide gaps in income, the political corruption, human rights violations, unemployment, and educated but dissatisfied youth may have been responsible. Now, when he's saying may have been responsible, then to sum it up so surely, I mean, that doesn't fit into the argument of the idea that is presented in the passage. He's just expressing what you call a possibility, that's all. To sum up on those possibilities, well, I don't think that's correct. So therefore, you see, number 2 is the correct option. And he says one who is gets on with his job in spite of obstacles. I mean, even if you don't have a word there, you have the clue that he gets on with his job in spite of obstacles. So, what kind of a person is that? I mean, is he artful? If you say he's artful, I think that is a misuse of the word. You see, in spite of the artful would mean what you call a kind of cunning, right? A kind of cunning sometimes mixed with dishonesty, you see. So, artful would not be the right word here, right? So, number 1 is ruled out. Okay. Number 2, he says one who is assiduous. And assiduous is taking great care, being very, what do you call, full of perseverance, cautious and persevering. Yes, when you talk about your job, you generally, you see, expect people to be assiduous, careful, and perseverant. He says one who is assiduous gets on with his job in spite of obstacles, while the one who is querulous is petulant, complaining. A person who is complaining all the time, petulant, you see, uh, hardly shows any progress. The latter. What do you mean by latter? That is the person who complains, spends all his time whining about his troubles. What do you mean by whining? That is, whining is supposed to be moaning. It's also, it's a similar word is, of course, complaining. If you call somebody a whiner, or if you say he's whining, that is, he's all the time mewling, crying, right? That is what you call whining. So, number 2 is the correct option. If you look at number 3, well, if you say one who is hardworking and one who is dishonest, up to that it's okay, right? You say he's hardworking, while the one who is dishonest hardly shows any progress. But the last one, the latter, spends all his time gossiping about his troubles. Do you think anyone can gossip about his own troubles? No, he would complain about his own troubles. He wouldn't gossip, you see. And the next one is one who is hot-headed. I mean, a person who is conceited, who gets angry quickly, who is conceited. Do you think he can get on with his job very well? No, he can't. So that cannot be the right option. So given this situation, number 2 is the correct option. You have 2 words, multiculturalism, and the other is tribalism. And from the meaning of the sentence, you can question, you can figure out that you see they are opposed to one another. Multiculturalism and tribalism are just opposites. Were you to use the word rise, suppose you say the rise of multiculturalism in times of war or economic doldrums, and then you say tribalism is what causes those in power to, it doesn't make sense. They are not grammatically or syntactically related. You see, you can read the sentence yourself by putting the word rise there. Or even if you put the word tyranny, you see, it wouldn't go syntactically or grammatically. All right. Antithesis means opposite, contradicting. Let me try that. In the antithesis of multiculturalism in times of war or economic prosperity, tribalism is what causes those in power to confine groups of people with different persuasions. Now, you cannot, this is the misuse of the word persuasions. You can have different ideologies, different beliefs. You can't say different persuasions. So, that is incorrect. So, the only correct option is number 4. Now, read the sentence with this. The opposite of multiculturalism in times of war or economic distress. See, there is a comma after multiculturalism. There is a comma after a blank. After economic, you have a blank. There's a comma there. Now, that is a clause in parenthesis. That is a bracketed clause because it has 2 commas there. See, the opposite of multiculturalism. Tribalism is what causes those in power to confine groups. Now, the opposite of multiculturalism is what? Tribalism. In economic distress, and then causes those in power to confine groups of people with different ethnicities into ghettos or in communes on the margins of their cities. So the correct option is number 4. We have specific words for specific writers, for specific people. The vocabulary is always specific when you talk about specific people, right? Uh, Now, for instance, the next one, that the artist went about systematically to get traditional and designs. Now, what do you mean by the artist here? You see, it is spelled with what? A final E, artist. So that means a performer, an entertainer, a dancer. Okay, and if it doesn't have an E, then it could be any artist. It could be a literary artist, it could be a painter, it could be a sculptor. Okay, that is the difference between the two, the one with an E and the one without an E. So when you talk about artists, then you don't talk about practices. I mean, in this sentence in particular, he talks about designs. If he is talking about designs, then it cannot be practices and totems and stories. It has to be motifs. You see, a motif, number 2, motifs are patterns, themes, right? Patterns, themes around which a story or any kind of, artistry evolves. That is a motif. When you watch films, you can see for yourself that is, the film generally has a motif, you see, a pattern, a design around which the whole story is built, or you can say upon which the whole story is built, right? So he says, went systematically to get traditional motifs and designs back into the mainstream and create a textile culture for dance to be celebrated. So that is the basic work of an artist, is to create, whether he's a dancer, a performer, an entertainer, a writer, a painter, a sculptor. The basic work is to create. So number 2 is the correct option. A totem is a symbol or a representation which may or may not have a spiritual significance, right? Most of us, or generally in all societies, they have certain totems. They would worship that totem because they think that this is the representation of the Almighty, or this is the representation of the spiritualism. So they worship that particular totem. So the correct answer is number 2. Yes, in response to my friend's request, I decided to write her a letter which I hope would be honest and practical, while also serving as a suppose you say as a map of sorts for my own feminist thinking. This book is a version of that letter with some details changed. Okay, now suppose the first blank can take up map, it can take up chart, it can even take up guide, you see. Okay, but then the second, if you say form, he says that the book is a form of that letter. Now what is that, what does that mean? The book is a form of that letter. It doesn't mean anything. So number two cannot be the option. Suppose you say that while serving as a base, okay, the book was the fallout of that letter. Now, that is the incorrect use of the word. Of fallout is generally, you see, used in a negative sense. So it cannot be used, you see, it cannot be a result, you see, of that letter. And then you say if it's a guide, then don't say the book is a précis of that letter. In fact, the book has to be not a précis, but perhaps the letter could be a précis of that book. It cannot be the other way around, right? So the correct option is number one, where you say map and version. You say it's a map of all sorts for my feminist thinking. This is a book is a version of that letter. The next one, quantum physics really begins to point to this discovery. It says that you can't have a universe without mind into it. Okay? And that the mind is actually the very thing that is being. Okay. Well, quantum physics, I think, has to do with all that energy and matter. Uh, a very quite a difficult topic. That way, quantum physics. So what you say is here is he says that it says that you can't have a universe without mind getting into it. Now, what do you mean by mind getting into it? I mean, that is a colloquial way of saying things, you see. Can you say my mind got into it? No. So number one, you cannot have number one as the correct option. The second one, the mind intruding into it. Well, if it intrudes, then that the mind is actually making the very thing that is being construed. If it intrudes, then it cannot possibly make, because an intrusion is unwelcome. You see, an intrusion is unwelcome. Intruding means I mean entering forcefully. So you cannot have number two as the correct option. If you say the mind entering into it, and that the mind is actually shaping the very thing that is being perceived, that is the correct option. And if you say the mind penetrating into it, and the mind is actually forming the very thing that is being seen. Now, why did I leave out number four? Though number four appears to be equally correct. I left out number four because perception is a more specific word than seeing. And here you are talking about a specific subject, okay, and something which is very exact and philosophical. You say the mind entering into it and the mind shaping what is being perceived. You see, perception is a different experience than seeing. The emperor ordered the arrest of his most vocal critic. Now, who is a critic? A critic is a person, you see, who censures, who can find fault with someone. A critic also, you see, can give a formal judgment or express a judgment on someone. That is a critic, you see. Okay, so number one is correctly used. You say we have several critics of this plan, of this proposal. Okay. Number second, there are very few film critics left in our city. Now, who are film critics? They are people who express their views, the good and the bad. It's not necessary. You see, it depends on the context in which it is used. In the first one, the emperor orders the arrest of his most vocal critic. You see, the very sentence indicates that that man That word critic means you see a person who finds fault with or censures. In the second, you see it's different. There are very few film critics. Film critics are those people who express a judgment. I mean, they might express the good and bad points both there. The third one, that's correct. Mahatma Gandhi's critique of the West remains relevant to this day. A critique is a critical analysis. A detailed critical analysis is a critique, right? So that is correctly used. His classmates warned him it's not a good idea to critique our principal. Now that is incorrectly used. I mean, how can you critique your principal? It's not possible. You can say it's not a good idea to criticize our principal, not critique. Okay, the river teemed with salmon and trout. Okay, that's correct. The first one means the river was full of, replete with, full of. The second one, the wedding was steamed in Bhojpuri style. That is a misuse of the word teamed. I mean, it doesn't mean anything. If you say the wedding was steamed in Bhojpuri style, you have to say the wedding was arranged in Bhojpuri style or it was set in Bhojpuri style, but you cannot use the word team there. That's incorrect. Number two is incorrect. Which team will win this year? That's obvious. That's correct. The film star wore a purple suit teamed with crimsonite, and that's also correct. Last week we learned about the right way to greet our customers. That's correct. Get it right the first time. Now that is incorrect use of the word right. You can't use right. Can you say get it right? You say get it written the first time, or it should be written, or it should be RIGHT. Okay, because he says here is an off-heard management slogan. So it should be get it uh, right, or RIGHT. In India, driving on the right side of the road is wrong. The right of afternoon means the practice, the ritual, the practice, you see, of afternoon tea. So number two is incorrect. The next one, the attackers decided to raise the castle to the ground. Now you can't use the word raise. You should say RAZE. That is the right word. If you're going to destroy, demolish a building, you use the word raise. The other three are correct. If you say they raised their children, that is they brought up their children. They nurtured their children. To raise a toast, I mean, if you raise a toast, you drink to the happiness, to the prosperity of someone. You raise a toast. And then, of course, the rays of the sun rose above the mountain. That's correct. There's nothing wrong in that. The next one, Shakespeare is sometimes referred to as a bard. A bard is a poet. It's an archaic use. Archaic means it's an old use, you see, poet. That's correct. He barred his soul to the preacher. No, it should be he bared. He bared, BARED. If you bare your soul, that is, you come abreast, you tell someone your innermost thoughts, your innermost feelings. So it should be BARED, bared. Okay. So number two is incorrect. Because of his age, he was barred from entering the theater. So he was prevented. He was not allowed to enter. He was prohibited. So that's the correct use. The bar barred all bards. So that's also correct. The bar, you see, prohibited or prevented the entry of all poets. That's correctly used. You must see for yourself that are there any references? Are there any antecedents? Are there any previous examples? You can't start a sentence with this or that. I mean, it's very rare. Exceptions may be there, but in general, you don't. You have to look for the references, the antecedents. What's an antecedent? You say, for instance, you say, now in this you have a sentence, look at number 3. He says, this reduced his need to go in search. Suppose you have this as the first sentence, then what do you mean when you say this reduced? Have you made a reference before? And then his need, whose need? Have you made a reference before? No. So you see, number 3 cannot be the first sentence. And by that same argument, number 1 cannot be the first sentence. You can't say he just harvested the wild grains. Whom are you talking about? We don't know. This was followed. What do you mean by this was followed? I mean, if you start a sentence by saying this was followed, that means you have already said something before. So you can't have number 4 as the first sentence. So given the options here, we have to put number 2 as the first sentence. The hunter-gatherer went from place to place in search of food. What he does, the first thing is he's going from place to place. The second thing is this was followed. What was followed? This search for food was followed by an attempt to grow food by scattering the spare grains, so that he saved the trouble of, you see, hunting for food. That is 2 and then 4. And then once you scatter the spare grains and when they sprout up, what happens? He just harvested the wild grains. He harvested them, and as the crops began to give better yields. Now, you see, I pointed out, he scatters the spare grains, then they, you see, spring out, they sprout, then he harvests them, and as the crop begins to give better yields, this reduced his need to go in search of animals and wild plants. So the order should be 2, 4, 1, 3. Now let us look at the next one. People here are one injury away from starvation, one misspoken word away from detainment or death. Okay. Soon, however, now why can't you say number 1 as the first sentence? People here. Now, what do you mean here? What place are you talking about? I mean, if I were to just say people here are one injury away, you will ask me, sir, what does here refer to? Which place where here refers to? Okay. Soon, however, she notices. Who notices? We don't know. She, we don't know. So number 2 cannot be the first sentence. What about number 4? Moreover. Moreover means that is, you have already stated something before. So that cannot be the first sentence. So in the available options, number 3 is the first sentence. Life in rural Kashmiri village seems idyllic. You can even pronounce it as idyllic. Idyllic is, you see, the promise of all, everything pleasant, utopian, right? A wonderful life, particularly in nature. That is, you see, idyllic or idyllic. I think it's the American pronunciation is idyllic and the British pronunciation is idyllic. And it comes from the word idyll, Idyll, and idyll is supposed to be a pastoral poem, you see, a literary form. That's to increase your vocabulary, you see. It's a pastoral poem. You had poets like, you see, Shelley and even other people, you see, Wordsworth and Spencer, who used to write pastoral poems, you see, based on nature. So that would be idyll. So number 3 is the correct option. He says, idyllic to Shalini at first, as she is befriending lovely people and admiring majestic natural scenery, especially in contrast to the cacophony of urban Mumbai. Cacophony is the noise, the disturbance. That is cacophony. Cacophony means the noise, the disturbance, right? You say the cacophony of 10 o'clock, you see traffic, the noise that is made there. So number 3 is the first sentence. And he's talking about Shalini. See, at first, look at the key word. It seemed idyllic to Shalini at first. But what happens? Soon she, however, see, however, at first she found it very much idyllic, very much salubrious, very much pleasant. But then soon, however, she notices the lack of access to basic medical care or education. That is a point opposed to what has already been stated. So number 3 and then number 2. And then you come to number 1, where you say people here are one injury away from starvation, one misspoken word away from detainment or death. Yes, because you don't have access to basic medical care, education, nothing. So 3, 2, 1, and the last one is 4. Moreover, the ever, in addition to all these things, in addition to all this lack, this want, the ever-present political disruptions mean that life in Kashmir is far from a Shangri-La utopia. The study published in the Lancet recently revealed that people living in democratic countries live longer than those who don't. They also have less of a chance of dying from heart disease, strokes, and even road accidents. Lancet, of course, I think it's a journal or a magazine. It's a study published in Lancet recently. Now, suppose you put this as number one, saying, well, it is making a general statement, then we have a problem putting, you see, number two somewhere. Because number two says, incredible as it may sound, we are now told that democracy is not just good for the soul, it is good for the body too. So the more general statement is number two. So therefore, we should have what you call number two as the first sentence. And the next would be the study. Look at the usage here. You have the study, and a study. Now that means a study is a general, what you call, reference, and the study, they are actually what you call references. You say a study was made about the population, full stop. The study indicated, then you don't use the article a. In the first part, you say a study, and in the second part, you say the study. So, in that sense, after two, you must have number 5. A study spanning 170 countries found a strong correlation between health and the most progressive form of government. The most progressive form of government is what? I think he's talking about the democratic government, and that is illustrated in number 1. The point that he makes in number 5 is illustrated in the number 1, and by pointing out, well, in democratic countries, people live longer than those who don't. They also have a less of a chance of dying from heart disease, strokes, etc. So it should be 2, 5, 1. And then again, it should be the study suggests, because we are moving on with that same idea. The study suggests that elections and the health of the people are increasingly inseparable. You see, it is related in thought. And then, of course, the last one, without pressure from voters or foreign aid agencies, directors have less incentive to finance more expensive prevention and treatment to heart disease, cancers, and other chronic illnesses. Okay, so the answer should be 25143.